Have you ever watched five people edit the same Excel sheet live without a single hiccup and wondered how is it not total chaos? Today, you'll see exactly what's going on behind the scenes in Microsoft 365 co-authoring. We're pulling back the curtain on those invisible check-ins, merges, and magic moments when two people fix typos in the same cell, sometimes on spotty hotel Wi-Fi. If you think real-time collaboration is just pretty UI, you'll want to see the architecture making it bulletproof until it isn't. The illusion of real time, what you see isn't what everyone gets. Ever watched your edits appear in a shared Word file with almost zero delay, as if everyone's thoughts are landing in perfect sync letter by letter? That instant feedback makes it feel like the document's alive, mirroring each keystroke across continents. But anyone who's used Office long enough knows the truth. Sometimes your change is there, and sometimes the cursor blinks in silence while the app politely holds its breath. The illusion is convincing, but what's actually happening under the hood is much more chaotic and a lot smarter than it looks. Let's try something most teams have done at least once. A few of you are editing a document at the same time, maybe with one person in London fixing wording and someone else in Sydney updating a chart. The interface wants you to believe that every change is immediate and universal. In reality, Office is pulling off a sleight of hand. The goal is that nobody waits for a server round trip before seeing their text take shape, no matter how many time zones or network hops are involved. But under that polished surface, there's a dozen invisible steps happening the second you type a single character. Here's where the UI pulls its first trick. It gives top priority to your own edits. You type a word and it appears instantly. It doesn't matter if the Wi-Fi hiccups or your Teams call is eating bandwidth. The Office client immediately shows you the update and optimistically assumes nobody else is typing in the exact same spot. That's the big gamble. Office is designed to bet that most of the time, two people aren't colliding in the same sentence or cell at the same microsecond. Why wait for the cloud's blessing when you can leverage what engineers call optimistic concurrency? Just send the change and hope you're alone on that part of the page. In practice, you almost always are. Still, let's make it real. Imagine you're in Excel, hammering out numbers in the quarterly report. Down the hall, Jordan's also updating totals in the same sheet. Then, as fate would have it, you both click into cell D20 and make a change. You're confident your update will stick, and Jordan thinks the same. If you're watching the screen, it feels like your edit wins. And for a second, it does. Underneath, though, your local app hasn't actually confirmed with anyone else that you're in charge of D20. It's a little like writing a postcard and tossing it in the mail. You see your message instantly, you have no clue when or if another one's coming to the same address. The network is the post office, but there's always travel time and the occasional traffic jam. Microsoft's own engineers break this process down in a way that sounds simple until you realize how complex it gets in practice. Every time you make a change, the Office app quietly records a tiny update, including who made it and when. These updates live locally on your device for a moment, waiting their turn to sync out to the cloud. Instead of flooding the network with every keystroke, the app batches changes and sends them in bursts. This is all happening behind the scenes without slowing you down or making you wait for confirmation before you keep typing. So why does it all feel so smooth even when a dozen people are poking at the same document? That's because the app is always gambling that you're not bumping into anyone else. Usually it's a safe bet. But as more people start working in the same spot or the network gets shaky, those assumptions can fall apart. When that happens, Office has to figure out which changes line up and which ones need a referee. This is when quiet optimism gets traded for negotiation. But for a few seconds, or sometimes even longer, Office lets the illusion play out. You get your feedback immediately, the UI updates. Meanwhile, all the real work kicks off in the background. The client starts sending your changes to the server, checking for new edits from your colleagues, and making sure there isn't a hidden collision lurking in someone else's postcard. If Office spots a conflict, it has to quietly step in, compare what just happened, and pick a path forward, often without you even knowing. Think about it. The reason you rarely see conflicting edits pop-ups isn't because they never happen, but because Office does so much to guess, adjust, and correct without stopping the flow. Your screen shows what you typed right away, but that may only be a best guess of the final saved version. As long as nobody collides, you never notice. But the magic is all about keeping the smoke and mirrors up until the instant someone else's postcard says, "Wait, I was already here." That's when the real show begins for Office's engineering. The instant two people try to write in the same place, those background checks step up and decide who gets to keep their edit. It's less about preserving the illusion and more about quietly keeping everyone's work safe. When edits collide, how Office picks a winner. and prevents data loss. The first time you see two different edits on the same document pop up, it feels a lot like software misbehaving. The reality is most users go months or even years without ever seeing a real conflict warning in Office. The system's designed to keep these moments rare, but that only makes them more interesting when they actually happen. So what if you and a coworker both edit the same sentence or hit the same cell in Excel at the same time? One of you has to win out, but the way Office protects your work goes way beyond just picking the last save. Let's make it concrete. Picture an actual team meeting. You're live on a Teams call, walking through an Excel sheet with your finance crew. The numbers in column H are a mess. Totals aren't what they should be, and everyone notices. You and Ravi both jump in, click on the same cell, and start updating those totals. You hit enter a split second before Ravi, at least on your screen. The question most users never ask is, what happens now? Think about it. The file could fork right there. Without a plan in place, you'd run into duplicate rows, scrambled data, or a corrupted file. But Office plays referee by always watching for overlapping edits. It's scanning each update in the background, looking for spots where more than one person wrote to the same location before the cloud gave it a thumbs up. Once a conflict pops up, Office flags it, even if only one of you notices. In Word, you might get a window saying we found a conflict. In Excel, it's a little more subtle, a simple prompt, or in some cases, a yellow triangle next to the cell. Most people fly past these, but this is where the system quietly asks for a decision. Sometimes it's as easy as last writer wins. If your update hit the server after Ravi's, yours becomes the official one, at least for a moment. But that isn't always the case. Not every collision is resolved automatically. That's where Office's conflict detection gets complicated. In Word, for example, you might get prompted to pick which version you want to keep. If neither user is willing to give up their edit, the app will even merge the changes and show what's different side by side, waiting for someone to choose. In Excel, with its grid-based logic, the system often flags issues without overwriting anything. The latest entry wins in the view, but the old value isn't lost. It's tracked in version history, buried just a right click away. Optimistic concurrency plays a huge role here. Earlier, we talked about how Office bets that two people won't edit the same thing at the same time. Most of the time, that's true. If a race condition does happen, the apps fall back on versioning. Every change is stamped with user info and a timestamp, so you can both go back and restore earlier data if needed. Accidentally overwrite somebody's carefully updated number. No need to panic, you can roll back or merge thanks to the system logging everything the second it happens. Now, if you've ever worried about losing hours of work in one unlucky click, here's a welcome twist. Office holds on to way more version history than most people realize. Even during repeated collisions, think of a boardroom where 3 people are frantically updating a sales proposal at once. The system keeps a complete log. All the raw data, the old text and the replaced numbers are still there. Unless you intentionally delete something, nothing is lost for good. In fact, for sensitive teams, it's common to see even more granular auditing switched on, so every tweak, mistake, or fix gets a digital paper trail. There's something clever about how Microsoft handles these collisions without bothering most users. Plenty of collaborative platforms punt on this and just block simultaneous edits, leading to that dreaded locked for editing by another user message. With Office, even if your session drops, your changes don't vanish. The app will preserve them in a local cache or try to merge them when you reconnect, putting conflict resolution right back in your hands instead of letting your work evaporate. Even network dropouts or brief outages rarely cause true data loss because every keystroke and cell update is stamped and tracked for later replay. This is why those lost my changes horror stories are actually pretty rare these days. If something does slip through, maybe network issues or a clever user finds a new edge case, version history means you can often step back through the timeline and figure out where things split. For teams, this audit trail is more than peace of mind. It's essential for compliance, recovery, and troubleshooting. So next time you watch 2 people race to fix the same typo or update the same cell, know this. The only reason the system looks smooth is thanks to about a dozen layers of versioning, merging, and never trusting any single edit until it clears all the checks. And when the dust settles, you're always protected. But there's a catch here. You might wonder, with so much happening on different devices, who's actually keeping score behind the scenes? That's where Microsoft Graph steps in, working quietly to keep everyone in sync, whether you're editing from your laptop in London or your phone in Jakarta. the hidden conductor, Microsoft Graph, and the art of syncing across the world. If you've ever caught yourself flipping between editing a Word file on your laptop and taking a stray note on your phone, it's easy to assume the magic is happening inside some Microsoft server farm you'll never see. In reality, those updates you make on the go, maybe in a spreadsheet at the airport or in a PowerPoint deck just before a meeting, are carefully routed, sequenced, and matched up thanks to something called Microsoft Graph. Most people have never heard of it, but it's the system quietly making co-authoring work, no matter what device you grab first. Here's a familiar picture. You're in an airport lounge, half listening for your boarding call while updating milestones in a project plan. Across town, Kim is sitting in a coffee shop, tweaking the same file because she thinks she's the only one awake. Minutes later, you both notice the numbers line up. It feels instant, like the document is following both your cursors with one mind. But what's actually at work is Microsoft Graph, quietly behind the scenes, playing traffic cop and timekeeper at the same time. Unlike legacy systems that depend on a single save event, think Locked for Editing by John Smith, and a lot of angry emails, Office leans on Microsoft Graph to create a living, always-on changelog. Each edit carries your user ID, a timestamp, and a version marker, so when you tap save or just pause for a moment, the system knows exactly who did what and when. The trick isn't just moving data around, but lining it up in the right order, even if those updates don't arrive at the server in the sequence you'd expect. Now, things start to get interesting when network conditions aren't quite perfect. Maybe your Wi-Fi drops right as you update the Q4 budget, or Kim's laptop toggles between coffee shop wireless and her phone's hotspot. The old way, your changes would vanish, or even worse, overwrite Kim's without warning. Instead, Microsoft Graph starts batching up changes as soon as it senses a connection hiccup. Every edit sits in a queue tagged with a unique transaction marker. When you finally reconnect, even if it's hours later, those changes upload as a bundled package, not as a wild flood of keystrokes. And because every update is stamped with a token and a timestamp, Graph can fit it back into the puzzle in exactly the right spot. That's how you end up with a seamless merge instead of a document meltdown. Let me give you a real-world scenario. Imagine Pedro's editing a proposal on his tablet, but he's traveling and the train's Wi-Fi keeps cutting out. He finishes his section offline. 3 hours later, once he's got solid signal, his edits trickle in. Microsoft Graph picks up that gap, not just as a random flurry of data, but as a coherent set of changes that happened during his session. On your end, you're working away the whole time, totally unaware that Pedro was editing offline. As soon as Graph sees both streams of changes, it checks for overlaps, prioritizes based on timestamp and device, and if there's a conflict, marks it for review. But if you both edited non-overlapping sections, everything merges smoothly and the document looks like nothing skipped a beat. This is where batching really pays off. Rather than chatty back and forth for every single mouse movement, Graph will hold a set of changes until the app signals a natural breakpoint, a pause in typing, an autosave, a scroll away from the cell. That's when your changes ship out as a batch, reducing the risk of mid-edit collisions and cutting the amount of traffic across unreliable networks. For remote teams or anyone hopping between mobile data and office Wi-Fi, it's a small detail that means a lot less drama. But Graph's job doesn't end at basic syncing. It acts as the control center for all these operations, ensuring nothing falls through the cracks. When a conflict finally gets detected, maybe you and someone else just can't resist that same subject line in an email draft. Graph steps in to alert the Office app, which then prompts you to pick a winner. Even then, you don't lose your version. Everything is linked back to its original author and timestamp, so you can restore any lost changes from version history if needed. What about version order? That's where those user tokens, timestamps, and version IDs work over time. If Kim's changes to a spreadsheet cell reach the server out of sequence, say her coffee shop internet holds them for a few extra seconds, Graph can still tuck them into the right spot in the document's timeline. So you don't get duplicate rows or backward sections. Everything flows as if your team was working in the same room on the same device. This entire orchestration is why your files almost never feel stale or out of sync, whether you're editing in Outlook's browser preview or toggling between OneDrive and SharePoint from your mobile. Microsoft Graph quietly keeps the whole show running, catching changes, slotting them into place, and surfacing issues only when there's a genuine problem. When it works, and it usually does, you don't even notice. But for all its reliability, there are moments when even this system gets tripped up. Maybe it's a corrupted cache, an expired token, or something stranger. When that happens, knowing your recovery options makes all the difference. When co-authoring breaks, recovery, version history, and troubleshooting for the real world, every collaboration story has that one moment. Maybe it's the big deadline or the final review meeting when Office's co-authoring magic quietly fails. You see it when someone's edits stop updating or a document just refuses to load after an outage. It feels almost personal, like the system picked the worst possible time to melt down. We've all been there. Let's say you and your team are in the thick of polishing a proposal, everyone hammering out issues in real time. Suddenly, someone notices their changes aren't showing up for anyone else. People start refreshing, closing, and reopening, and that creeping sense of dread settles in. It's the stuff admin nightmares are made of, except there's usually a safety net hiding in plain sight: version history. Corruption, network headaches, even accidental overwrites, they don't just risk a few lost minutes. For a lot of teams, hours or even days of effort could be on the line. Office tries to keep your work safe, but when those invisible systems trip, things get weird fast. Picture a real incident: a small project group in a shared conference room swapping ideas in a Word doc over spotty guest Wi-Fi. Halfway through an edit, the Wi-Fi drops for 3 minutes. A classic meeting room move. By the time everyone reconnects, 3 versions of the doc have exploded into existence. Some edits overlap, others vanish entirely. Now people are wondering which copy is right, and nobody wants to admit they might have overwritten someone else's changes. Panic mode, right? But this is where version history does its best work. With autosave as your backup singer, Office quietly rolls snapshots of your doc every few minutes, sometimes even more often, depending on settings. When disaster hits, you just need to open the file's version history. In Word or Excel, you can restore the document to any earlier state, see who made changes, and check the timeline like flipping back through a security camera reel. Suddenly, those lost paragraphs or fiddly chart updates aren't so lost after all. No more arguments over who saved last or hours spent trying to reconstruct missing work. One click and you're back in the game. Co-authoring also uses checkpoints, those little unseen markers that get set when the file moves out of draft mode or whenever major edits come through. Think of it as your document quietly dropping anchors as you go. So if the current session hits a snag, you can roll back to one of those stable points. The worst case, you may have to replay a few minutes of typing, but full-on data loss, actual disappearing work, is astonishingly rare unless someone intentionally clears everything out. Still, the main villain in co-authoring outages is almost always the network. Office's sync system leans on steady authenticated connections, so if your network flakes out, things can get messy quickly. Proxy settings cause timeouts. VPNs confuse authentication. Sometimes a device falls out of sync just because Windows decided it was time to go to sleep. The most common breakages trace right back to poor connectivity, expired tokens, or interrupted sync, way more often than you'll ever see true file corruption. If you hit that wall, step 1 is always checking your connection and confirming your Office app is signed in. A quick status check in OneDrive or SharePoint can flag trouble upstream. If Office apps get stuck, you see that little sync icon spinning forever, a restart can jog it loose. Failing that, digging into the local Office cache can reveal pending changes waiting for upload. You can clear or repair the cache if you spot files refusing to sync. For more stubborn issues, Microsoft gives admins a handful of tools. The Office Upload Center, now partly replaced by built-in status indicators, offers a way to see pending uploads directly. If version history and cache clearing don't fix things, you're into repair mode, running account reauthentication, resetting activation, or sometimes the nuclear option of fully reinstalling or clearing local user profiles. Oddly enough, the "who saved over my work" question almost never needs to come up. If your team's comfortable with version restore, even the worst network mess just means a detour, not a dead end. The version timeline shows not just the text, but who changed what, down to edits made mid-call or after hours from a mobile device. For some teams, legal, finance, healthcare, this level of recovery isn't just nice to have, it keeps them compliant and audit ready. One thing to keep in mind: no troubleshooting tip will save you from bad device hygiene. Closing laptops mid-upload or working off the same document in different apps, like Word Desktop and Word Online without saving in between, is asking for conflict trouble. Make syncing a habit, check for the green checkmark, and when in doubt, use web-based Office for its live status view. So yes, co-authoring fails happen, but they're very rarely catastrophic. The deep versioning, checkpoints, and admin tools built into Microsoft 365 aren't just for the rare disaster, they're for everyday protection, big and small. It's not flashy, but for anyone who's rescued hours of work with a few clicks, it's quietly heroic. All these layers remind us how much planning and subtle engineering it takes to keep your work both synced and safe. And once you understand where those tools live and how to use them, you're not just writing out the hiccups. You're actually steering the ship, keeping your files and your team exactly where they belong. Now, knowing where to find these guardrails can change the way you collaborate, because the more you understand what's running in the background, the more you can actually trust your documents to keep up with your team, even on your worst network day. If you've ever wondered why co-authoring seems to just work until it suddenly doesn't, all those background systems are the reason. Now, knowing where version, history, and sync checkpoints live, you're in a better spot to keep your team's work safe, even when the tech stumbles. It pays off in less panic and fewer mysteries when things go wrong. If these deep dives into Microsoft 365 help you work smarter, consider subscribing. I'd love to hear your best or worst co-authoring story in the comments. Microsoft 365 always has another layer